2 for the Excellence in Practice module. So for this module now, so this is the second day, we're going to be looking into obviously the core strands 3 and 4 within the content covered within the sessions. So what I'm going to do is give you a bit of an overview now, really, a bit of a welcome, a bit of an overview of what to expect throughout the day. So what I'll also be doing within this introduction, within this welcome, is give you a little bit more information about the part 2 of your assessment. So give you a little bit of food for thought, and share some ideas as well that maybe you could think of when creating your presentation. So as we're going to be covering the core strands 3 and 4, obviously that will be led within the content covered within the rest of the day, within the morning and the afternoon. And we also have Ask the Expert, which I'll go through in a minute with you, to give you a bit of a brief overview. Can I also ask really as well that, because it's so important, these professional discussions, if you can just, obviously it's fine to have your cameras off while we're delivering, but just within part of those discussions, it'd be great if you can have your cameras on and really engage in those really important discussions, which is really driving a lot of this content really, isn't it, is sharing your practices, and kind of delving a lot deeper really with you as professionals, and really considering really what you're doing yourselves within the practice itself. Okay, so just to give you the overview of today, so I'm giving you the welcome now and the plan for the day. So from 10 o'clock onwards, we'll be looking into analysing then these challenges and the barriers really that we believe really might be impacting upon whole setting approaches. So obviously this will lead really nicely into some of your content for your assessment. And then from 11:30 till 11:45, you'll have a 15-minute breather there, a bit of a break. And then at 11:45, we'll be having Professor Jonathan Glazard from Edge Hill University. I'll give you a little bit of a brief introduction in a minute. That's really exciting, and I'll ask the experts obviously really engage in some of this content. And then from 1 o'clock till 1:30, that'll be a lunch break. And then from 1:30 till 3 o'clock, we'll be covering a bit of core strand 4, which looks at reflecting then on the skills needed to engage and challenge then these key stakeholders in implementation of change. Then a quick brain break, and then what we'll be doing at the very end is just doing a recap really of what the content will have been covered within the sessions today, and have a little bit of a reflection upon that and how you could potentially draw the information for your assessment. While I'm delivering today, really, if you've got any questions or anything you want to ask, please just pop them in the chat. And like I'm saying, if there's anything that I don't answer to through this introduction really about your assessment, I'll just leave a little bit of time at the end really where you can ask me any questions that you think that you need to know the answer to in relation to the assessment. So we've got Ask the Expert and Professor John Glazard, which I'm sure lots of you have maybe come across his work before. So it's really exciting, and hopefully you'll get a lot from this as well. So just give you a bit of introduction really. So he's the Professor of Teacher Education and Head of Children Education and Communities Department at Edge Hill University. He has written countless texts on mental health, well-being and inclusion in education. He's a former primary school teacher and assistant head teacher, and therefore he has a wealth of experience in education. His research focuses on a broad range of topics, so including inclusion, special educational needs, mental health and well-being, and he's going to talk to us today about his experiences and how he views excellence in practice. So hopefully this will be really, really useful, and hopefully really engaging as well, to maybe have a little look a bit deeper into these aspects. So just to remind you really, now I know that Rhiannon gave you lots of information about your assessment for part 1 in the last national conference day. Now, if you weren't able to make the conference day, or maybe you want to recap, the recording is available on the Pebble Pad. So if you want to access it through there, and you can have a little look back really at the recording, just to remind yourselves really as to what a bit more guidance really with that part 1 aspect. So overall, what the assessment's asking you to do is to critically evaluate the provision for ALN in your current setting and develop an action plan to overcome barriers to inclusive practice. So it's 4,000 words and it's set into 2 parts. So you've got the audit, which I know some of you are probably already kind of looking into, that you've been kind of looking at these aspects of practices to discuss, and that's your 2,500 words, with the beginning being your kind of 500 introduction and the rest being your audit. And the second part is the online presentation, which I'm going to cover with you this morning. So that's your 12 minutes presentation, which is what we call like the equivalent, like Rihanna went through last National Conference Day, which is about, an equivalent. So you have got, again, your 10% leeway, as we discussed last conference day as well. So you've got that 10% leeway. So I know it's just, just over a minute, but you can obviously consider that there is a little bit of wriggle room as well with the presentation. So the part one was the audit. So obviously it's really important, obviously with the part one, that you'll need to have done this first, because this will naturally feed then into part two of your assessment. So I know a lot of you probably already have thought of this already, but you need to be thinking about identifying effective practices in your setting for whole school inclusive approaches. So you'll think about practices that you're already doing, and then maybe potentially considering though what maybe barriers exist and how they could be overcome. So I know, obviously, like I was saying, there's a lot more detail about this from Rhiannon last conference day, but you will need to think about how this feeds in then with this part two of your online presentation. So the presentation looks at the findings then of your audit with analysis then of these key challenges. So you're kind of delving a lot deeper, which is going to link nicely to the content that's going to be covered through the National Conference Day today, hopefully, to really engage with these discussions as to maybe what does create these barriers. Obviously, I know a lot of you will have looked at the Pebble Pad and all the content that we've put on there for you, really, to really help you and kind of think about these and engage with some of the key literature. But what you need to be thinking about on a whole school approach then, and then think about reflecting on the skills and actions and strategies that are needed then to engage key stakeholders. Something that we've covered a lot really within the content of this module really is kind of the challenges we have to overcome with working with these outside key stakeholders as well. So within the presentation, so this is taken from the guidance within your assessment guide online on the Pebble Pad. But just to remind you then that the presentation should include the following points. So you'll need to provide a general overview of the findings from the audit. So naturally, you're going to have to draw upon what you found within that audit and draw it into the beginning really of this presentation. So it's kind of bringing it down really into the key aspects. You need to think about what are the key parts from the audit that you're going to need to focus on within this now when you think about moving forward with the challenges and how you're going to overcome them. So within that then, it's really important that we provide this analysis. So you need to provide an analysis then of the key challenges to whole setting approaches. So I know from discussions even I've had with, so, individuals within my institution and things, that's very much a part of this really, isn't it? Is that sometimes it's quite hard to ensure that this is working on a whole setting approach as well. So really what you need to be doing here is thinking about why is that so challenging maybe at times to provide this consistent whole setting approach. And then once you've done that, what you'll need to be thinking about is reflecting then, okay, within your own setting, reflection on the skills and actions and strategies needed to engage and challenge your key stakeholders. So it depends what your findings are, obviously, what the literature, looking at, your policy, your legislation within this as well, and then linking into maybe what the challenges may be moving forward as well. It's really important to remember that you need to reference within this presentation. So obviously, if you're using the documentation, the legislation, say from the Welsh Government, your ALN, your ALN code, etc., make sure that you are referencing them. The policy needs to be in there, but also any links to any literature that you've come across. One within, sometimes you can use obviously within the Pebble Pad that you maybe have read, but also maybe things that you have researched yourself needs to be stated within the presentation. So that's really important that you provide us with a reference list. So the last slide of your presentation will need to be a reference list which provides the references that are covered within the main content of your assessment presentation. You should, well, they say obviously we're giving you a guide here between 4 to 8, but it mustn't be more than 8 slides. Okay, so you need to use between 4 to 8 slides. It's really important you stay within this because obviously we've given you kind of an equivalent of the word allowance that you've got for this assessment. So between the 4 to 8 slides, though, that doesn't include obviously the title page, the title slide, and then your reference list. Okay, so it's the slides between those which will count towards your 4 to 8 slides. Okay, so just be aware really that there is that limitation really on how many slides you should be presenting within your presentation. If you've got any more questions, obviously I'll take those at the end as well about this. So just to remind you really as well about the marking criteria and the assessment criteria while you're producing your presentation. And I would just really recommend that you are kind of referring back to this really, because it really helps you kind of engage and kind of, look at maybe potentially what you need to be including in relation to where you would be in relation to how many points you'd get for your presentation. So just to make you aware really that within those two parts, you've got the first part, which is very much about your analysis really of these key challenges. So if you're managing to do this very good analysis of the key challenges, then obviously you're going to be more at your distinction level. So you need to think about that, how much of analysis, how you're putting that across within your assessment. And then for the second part, this is very much about your critical reflection then. So it's very much a critical reflection then at maybe the fact that at times it is challenging to obviously, to engage key stakeholders, but also there's challenges that you might want to consider within the whole school approach as well within that. So you need to be critical. So within your critical reflection, you're looking at it from different aspects there. So think about, the legislation, think about then obviously the literature you're reading. And again, if you want to aim for that distinction sort of level, the top level, then you need to be showing a very good presentation that demonstrates this excellent critical reflection. So I just wanted to remind you of that really, the assessment criteria. It gives you a good idea then really as to how we are kind of, assessing you and your presentation while you're creating it. Okay, so in relation to the marking criteria, there is a weighting, as I know you've probably come across before with your other assessments. So just to make you aware, so within the whole assessment now, so part one, so within those two sections of your part one, you've got obviously the audit, which you will have been already thinking about undertaking at the moment. And that's 20% weighting of your overall grade. So that will be your learning outcomes 1 and 2. And then the action plan that you'll be creating from that audit, that will provide you with 25% weighting of your overall grade, which will be learning outcomes 2 and 3. And then for the part 2, so that's your presentation, which I'm going to kind of discuss in a bit more detail now with you again. But that's your analysis then of the key challenges, which we were talking about then. Now that will give you 25% again for learning outcome 4. And then the actual critical reflection of the skills in challenging and implementing whole school approaches is learning outcomes 1 and 3, and that's 25% weighting. And just be aware really that obviously you do have that 5% as well for your academic writing skills and referencing as well. Okay, so we've got obviously the Welsh versions there and available for you. I'm going to just go through the English version now. So what I've done is just provided you with a few points really, just some key ideas to think about when you're creating a presentation. Now, I'm really sorry if some of you, are really happy with this already, and maybe you've already got some good ideas into how you'd lay it out and what you need to think about. But just as a little reminder really, into some of the key points that we look at when we're creating a presentation. So I've just taken really some of Gallo's ideas about what makes a good presentation. So obviously in relation to this concept is that it needs to be understandable. So just really be thinking about within your presentation, okay, is it clear and is it understandable? So sometimes when we're working with quite complex ideas and information, it can come across maybe quite complicated, when really at times what you need to be doing is making sure it's not, you're avoiding this complexity and confusion, and you're kind of just making it very clear and understandable to the audience and the person watching your recording. So that's really important really. And then the other thing that Gallo discusses is this idea of it needs to be memorable. So what you don't want to be doing is overloading your slides or providing too much information on individual slides. And Gallo sort of highlights that neuroscientists believe that between 3 to 7 points in the working memory that a human brain can remember. So just thinking about the fact that if you're overloading information, it can be really quite hard for the person watching to remember. So it's a lot to do with this idea that you need to obviously lots of research, but you're going to be bringing it down to your key points for your presentation. because you have only got 12 minutes for this, and it needs to focus well upon the key parts that you think are really relevant to discuss. So that's why you need to do all the research really and break it down into your key focuses. And then obviously lastly is the emotional element that Gallo discusses, which is really, that you're kind of providing a tone of voice, which is providing a little bit of enthusiasm, that you've got the right tone of voice, the right pitch, and that you're engaging really the audience in the way in which it's presenting. So just be really careful really that, I know obviously a lot of you maybe are using notes, which is good. It's preparation. It's good to be well planned, but you want to kind of avoid just reading off slides or reading off a script. That you are obviously presenting it in a way that's quite engaging, and it provides that emotional connection really with the person watching your recording. So just a few ideas as well really is just to remind you of. So also think about your font type. What you don't want to be using is anything, really difficult to read. So, some of these really pervasive fonts that are available, try to avoid them. Try to use kind of like, standard fonts, like your Arial, etc., the Times New Roman, whichever one you feel, is best suited for your assessment. But as long as it's clear and it's a font type that you can easily read and the audience can follow really easily. And in relation to the size of the font, that's also important. I mean, it does depend on how you're structuring your slides. But for instance, so I've used here like font, my font size is 26. So maybe just think that, gauge kind of what you don't want it to be is too small and really difficult to read, but you obviously don't want it too big and overpowering either. So just try and make sure that it is relevant to the information that's on your slide. Think about your literature sources themselves. So one thing I would say is make sure they're suitable. So obviously, the most important thing really, especially at master's level, is you're using more research-based sources, because obviously then they're more reliable, there's more validity there, and obviously making sure that, with something like this as well, that you're focusing upon, Wales and the ALN legislation that comes from that as well. The other thing is to just avoid overcrowded slides. It's quite difficult at times if you feel like there's a large volume of information that you want to cover. But I think it's really important to remember that you are verbally carrying the presentation, okay? You're verbally carrying it, and your slide should be just kind of helping the audience follow what you're saying within your verbal presentation as well. So like I've put here, try and prioritize that information. Bring it down. That's why I was saying to you before, the planning is so important and the research really, and you're bringing it down into the key points really that you'll be verbally presenting within your presentation. Obviously make sure it's suitable design slide. There's some of these pre-made ones now that can be really quite difficult to read, if they're very bright and colorful in the backgrounds. Maybe sometimes if people use a very light background and a very light font, it's really difficult to read. So just be aware really that you are providing that suitable slide design, and it's easy for the audience to read it. Your structure. Obviously you are going to need to remember that beginning, the middle and the end. So you will need a bit of an introduction, you'll need your main body, and you will need your conclusion or your summary at the very end. So please make sure that you are planning it out like that. What we don't want is it just to end either. So, we want you to set us up at the beginning, okay, what's about to come within the presentation. Then obviously your main body is covering the biggest meat, the biggest focus part there. And then at the end, you'll need to kind of draw it together nicely, really, not just end your presentation straight away. So like I mentioned before, really, it's things like your voice, your pace, your pitch, thinking about, that you are at a suitable pace for obviously you've got a time limit, but also that it's not too fast, and that it's easy to follow. Timing is the other one. So you do have that 12 minutes with 10% wriggle room, but you need to make sure that you're keeping within that timing. And I would suggest the only way to make sure that works is to things like to practice really, and to make sure that you are considering this in your preparation and your planning before you actually record it. References, really important. So obviously think about, adding references where relevant, but then just making sure where you are referring to sources that you're also adding them to your reference list. just remember that it is still a really important aspect of a presentation, just like it would be with another form of an assessment. You need to be supporting what you're saying, especially if it's something that might be seen as being slightly, a bit of an assumption or a judgment, which I think can quite easily happen when you're talking about practices at times, but it does need to be supported by a form of literature. So just think about, making sure you're popping that within your presentation. And then lastly, I just wanted to kind of remind you of something really important, really, is that the whole presentation focuses on the assessment requirements. So try really hard, because you have got, this set time allowance as well, not to kind of go off on a tangent or lose focus of what the actual assessment is asking you to do. Okay, so it's just really important to focus on the main aspects of the presentation, the assessment. It could be quite easily really to kind of maybe fall into discussing other aspects, say, of key stakeholders, but that's not relevant. Okay, so just keep bringing it back to what is stated within those learning requirements. So just in relation to your structure, really, just a reminder, I know you probably already know this, but, like they were saying, this is how I always remember it as well, but they do say with a structure, don't they? Tell them what you are going to tell them. So that's your introduction. Then your main body, you're telling them. And then in your your brief summary or your conclusion, you basically summarize what you tell them, what you've told them, and you're just summarizing then what you've said. So just thinking of it a bit like that, really. It's you're setting them up, you're giving the main body, and then you're kind of summarizing them. Sometimes it's really nice when people even leave you with a final thought that they've thought of from this, but just some ideas really when you're creating your presentation. So in relation to things like, your overview of audit findings, I'd probably suggest that needs to be at the beginning, doesn't it? You need to have that at the beginning of your assessment, really. And then that will kind of follow on then, won't it, for things like your analysis of the key challenges. And then from your analysis, you'll be drawing upon and reflecting upon then your skills and actions to engage the key stakeholders within your setting. Okay, so I've just left a few minutes really for any questions. Does anybody have any questions or anything that you'd like to ask about the assessment?
There's a question from Laura, from Michelle, Laura.
Yes.
Is there a requirement for us to be face forward to the camera in the presentations, or should it be a voiceover over the slides? Just trying to understand the best way to present the information.
Yeah. So I think, sorry, the Facebook, yeah, on the camera presentation. Sorry, I just broke up then for a second. So voiceover slides, just trying to simplify. Yeah, okay. So obviously you'll need your camera on, won't you, with part of your presentation? And I think as you're doing it, really, naturally, you'll be kind of facing the camera, I'd suggest, anyway, while presenting them. What do you think, Rhiannon?
Yeah, I agree. I think you need to have your camera on and present so that we can see that you're presenting. Often when you present in, say, if you're doing it on PowerPoint, you come up as a little circle at the bottom, so it's not a big picture of you, it's just you at the bottom with the slides behind you. Other people, just thinking about the previous module, some people were quite clever in where they were able to position themselves in terms of the presentation, but mostly I think on PowerPoint you're just a small circle at the bottom. Okay, but yeah, we would like to have cameras on so that we can see it's you presenting.
Anybody else got any more questions or anything that you might be thinking about?
I've put in the chat, Laura, that there will be an opportunity later in the day as well. If people are sort of thinking about the presentation as we go through the day, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions in the plenary at the end of the day.
Brilliant. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So if you are thinking of any questions, then maybe just note them down ready for the end of the day. Then, as Rhiannon stating there, great. Okay. So just leave you lastly really with enjoy your day, really. So it's really exciting. They've got quite obviously our Ask the Expert session and things coming up. So yeah, just really enjoy the day. And like I said, if you've got any questions, maybe just note them down ready for the final thoughts at the end of the day. Okay, thank you.